one of the things that makes this particular symposium so special is that we've been privileged by having some very distinguished speakers to talk to us today about some of the challenges that the new administration is going to be facing and their own experience and how they've both dealt with them in their past careers, and those lessons can be applied to the future. And in particular, I'm delighted to have the chance to introduce Congressman Rob Portman this afternoon. We talk a lot at the LBJ School about what we think the model of public service is all about, and the sense in which individuals can make a difference for their country when they have that kind of commitment. And there are few better examples than the example of Congressman Portman, who in a variety of capacities over the last 2 decades has proved himself one of the most effective and committed public servants in national life today. He has served for a decade as a congressman originally from Cincinnati, and was elected to Congress in 1993, and had really a remarkable career as an individual who had tremendous respect from members on both sides of the aisle and from the executive branch, and really a remarkably effective legislator, something that President Johnson would be particularly appreciative of. After his very distinguished career in the Congress, President Bush asked him to serve in his administration first as U.S. Trade Representative and then Director of OMB. So thank you very much for being here and giving us a chance to have your thoughts on the coming challenges.
I was asked to talk about the domestic policy challenges that President-elect Obama will face. But let's start with the one that is so obvious, which is the economy. Rising unemployment, as we've seen this week, an increasingly volatile stock market. They've already passed 2 stimulus packages in Congress. I understand the need to act again, but I do have deep concerns about both the spending and tax side. If you look at what's happened in the past and we try to learn from it, I think any jump start on the spending side needs to be immediate and temporary spending. On the tax relief side, it ought to be viewed as more permanent. Why? So it can be relied upon. Investors and risk takers need to have the certainty. If there's going to be more tax relief, it needs to be something that people can believe in. Otherwise, the behavior won't change. From reading the tea leaves, I sometimes fear that Congress and the incoming administration may be looking at doing just the opposite in some or all of the stimulus package. A sleeper issue that needs to come back up to the front burner, and that's reforming our important entitlement programs before they swallow the rest of the federal budget. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are incredibly important programs, and some would argue among the most important things government has ever done. It's not that the programs aren't important, it's that we are creating IOUs for future generations, including some of the students here today, that will crowd out our ability to invest in education or infrastructure. That's where you believe we ought to make a bigger investment, or certainly our national defense or renewable energy. At a minimum, let's set up some sort of a process to look in a bipartisan way, hopefully away from the politics of it, at where we ought to go in these programs. That's why I think a commission makes sense. In the top 10 would be health care. 47 million people uninsured, a huge crisis. But on the cost side, however we solve the coverage problem, we must do something on cost containment. Or else these other fiscal issues I talked about cannot be dealt with, Medicare and Medicaid in particular. Energy. Of course, we need to curb our dependence on foreign oil. And I think it'll be interesting to watch the common ground forming around really 3 different areas. One is renewables. You'll see more in terms of a consensus around conservation, battery technology, and moving to better hybrid cars, and electric cars makes a lot of sense. Where we're having a tough time is on the supply side, aren't we? The other supply side issues, clean coal. How much emphasis are we going to put on coal? We have 200 or 300 years in the ground. It's obviously something we should try, but it's so expensive and the technology is not there yet. But that's something where I think that we need to find a consensus and move forward. Preparing our workforce for the demands of the global economy. You're doing it here. To me, it's about K through 12 and about higher ed, but it's also significantly about worker retraining and being sure that we figure out a way for lifetime learning to meet the increasingly competitive, interdependent world in which we live. Immigration. We need to face up to our immigration problem. And courageously, some tried to do that in the last Congress, were unsuccessful. It's time. Building a new consensus on international trade. As the former trade representative, obviously I have a passion for this, but we are at the point now where we can take advantage of this increasingly competitive and interdependent world if we do the right things in trade. If we don't, we will fall behind. Smarter, new, federal regulations that catch up with the complexity, particularly of the financial sector. We forget the fact that it's not just that we didn't have regulations, it's that we had too many agencies and departments with responsibility for oversight. And then finally, this is sort of a cop-out on my part, but reform of the way government works. There are too many things to put under it. I'll just mention two. Earmark reform. We should end earmarks. It results in, as I see a lot of people here working in Congress, a culture in Congress that is negative. And agency innovation. Jim and I talked a little about this at lunch, but there is so much room for innovation of the bureaucracy, and there will be more and more pressure to do so as Senator Obama puts agencies and departments under the microscope, as he has said he wants to do, and Senator McCain said he wanted to do it too. Great. It's time for that, and we have some metrics now to be able to measure that. So how do these challenges we face today relate to Lyndon Johnson and his legacy? Two quick examples. One, let's start by acknowledging that Lyndon Johnson, too, faced a lot of big challenges when he entered the Oval Office. Some people think, oh, this was a wonderful era of Camelot, and he didn't face big challenges. He had huge challenges. They were different than the challenges we face today. It was about really the unraveling of the social contract, not the financial system. But I will point to two specific approaches that he took in response to these challenges of his time that I think Senator, now President-elect Obama, and his administration can learn from. First is how Lyndon Johnson dealt with the issue of race. It was a major national issue, of course, during the Johnson administration. And as a politician from the South, as president, he showed both legislative skill and great political courage in his role in negotiating and passing the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of '65, moving our country one step closer to racial equality. I talked to Lucy a little about this at lunch and asked her about my thesis, which is that he had to go up against, some of his strongest allies in the Senate and people who have supported him all through his leadership career in the Senate. And she reminded me, which is really a much more poignant point, that he had to go up against his mentors. President Johnson was not just willing to take on a politically risky task. They required him to take on these members of his own party and his mentors and his allies, but that he persevered through it, thick and thin, and took risks. So I would hope that Senator Obama, who's going to face, as president, some of these same challenges, will learn from that lesson. The second example, and one I think Senator Obama should also study, is related to fiscal matters. When he signed the Medicare bill into law in 1965, remember, it was sold as a self-sustaining program that could help our most needy citizens. Today, it's an expanded program, as I said earlier, on autopilot. And with rising costs and an inherently flawed generational funding structure, which is shared by Social Security even more so, since Social Security relies even more on the payroll tax, it's putting enormous pressure, as we've talked about, on the budget. On Social Security, Lyndon Johnson increased benefits by 7% as part of the Medicare bill. As you remember, in part to make the Medicare bill more attractive, we increased benefits under Social Security. President Johnson also, at the recommendation of the President's Commission on Budget Concepts, became the first president to propose a unified budget, meaning, of course, that the Social Security revenues were then on budget and included in the overall budget. Clearly, to get our fiscal house in order, we've got to reform these critical programs. And any time you put a program together, including a stimulus package, in about a month and a half in Congress, it's very difficult to know with certainty what the long-term, even mid-term, even short-term sometimes, fiscal impacts are going to be. But the lesson, and I think the point really is the same one I discussed at the outset, is that President-elect Obama should look very carefully at the long-term fiscal implications of any new public policy in this area. Well, again, it's been great to be with you today. I'd like to finish by suggesting that perhaps the most important legacy of Lyndon Johnson is in how he governed. I think he demonstrated, as much as any American, that through commitment, hard work, and having your heart in the right place, you can make an incredible difference in the lives of people.